You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today is 1/26/21. Well, hey, maybe, just maybe, CO2 isn't so bad, but why are they getting rid of Keystone, the Keystone XL Pipeline, thousands and thousands of jobs, energy, self-sufficiency, all of these things going for it. Yet the first day of the new administration, it's been canceled. How bad an idea is that? I'd like to get your opinion. Just send us an email to kl@kerrylutz.com and give me your opinion, and we'll read them on air. So there's a organization called the Co2 Coalition, and right now we've got Gregory Writghtstone with us, who is going to talk about Keystone and why it should stay rather than go. Pleasure to have you on the show, Gregory. So Keystone Pipeline, getting rid of it. What's so bad about that?
Well, where do we start? It was scheduled to be built from Alberta, the Alberta tar sands in Canada, south across the international border into Nebraska. From there, it would be either refined there or moved to other refineries on the Gulf Coast. Joe Biden, on his first day of office, shut down the permit to cross the border. Without that international border, they had the permission and the rights of way, and everything was approved to go from the whole way from Canada through down to Nebraska. That was all shut down. And when fully operational, it was supposed to move 830,000 barrels of crude a day into the United States. The construction portion of this was expected to create between 11,000 and 13,000 jobs during the construction. That's a lot of high-paying union jobs that have just gone away, up in smoke, if you will. And what it's done, and what it's the end result of this, will be higher gasoline prices for all of your listeners. Definitely a deterioration in the Canadian-U.S. relationship because of this. Their Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who I'm no big fan of, but he's not happy about it. And it's going to lead to more dependence on oil from Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. Those people we've been dependent on for many, many, many decades. We finally, just recently, became energy independent after 60 or 70 years of each administration promising to make us energy independent. We just got there. And in fact, you may not be aware, but last week was the first time since 1985 that the United States imported 0 barrels of oil from Saudi Arabia. So we finally become energy independent. And here, Joe Biden's policies are putting us right back into the dependence of a volatile Middle East. We've already lost thousands of servicemen's and women's lives defending those oil fields and for wars for oil. We could have gotten away from that, and we did. But yet he wants to take us back into that dependency. I don't know about you. I probably do know about you. You don't want us fighting any more wars for oil. Neither do any one of your listeners. So no, thank you. I don't want that. I don't want that at all.
Yeah, but their contention is we're going to electric, and we are going to electric whether you like it or not. But the fact is that they're trying to speed it up. But, everybody forgets that Biden was part of an administration that had dozens of these turkeys, Solyndra, just dozens of green energy companies that went bankrupt, that were completely useless, waste of taxpayer money, totally corrupt. Nobody remembers this. And this was only 12 years ago, 10 years ago that it happened. Am I the only one that still has a memory in this country, Gregory?
Yeah. No, you're not. What they think is that they can replace reliable, abundant, and affordable energy that comes from fossil fuels and you can't use any one of those descriptors for wind or solar. And those descriptors are affordable, abundant, and reliable. None of those are descriptive of wind or solar. So it's going to be, and the fact of the matter is, you need those big, reliable, abundant energy sources to back up wind and solar for when the wind doesn't shine and the sun, or the wind doesn't shine.
Wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
There you go. Help me out there. I need it.
I'm trying here.
All right. I got a little dyslexia there.
Yeah, a little dyslexia. It all hits. It hits us all at one time or another, Gregory.
Yeah. And but you need those big energy sources, these big reliable to back up the unreliables that they want to depend on. There was another thing that Biden did that might be actually even more destructive than the XL. That's gotten a lot of press. He also banned any new permits for either leasing or drilling on federal lands. And there's two issues with that. Number one, it affects all of the Gulf of Mexico, and we rely on about 10% of our oil production comes from the Gulf of Mexico. That's a lot of oil that's going to go away that won't be produced. The other thing is the state of New Mexico, you may not realize it, has a huge oil and gas operations there. And most of those are on federal properties there. The big, you've heard of the fracking boom that's going on across the United States. Virtually none of that is on federal land. It's all on private land for the most part. So that won't be affected by this ban. The other key here is 2 weeks before Trump left office, the Trump administration signed a lease for the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska, or the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It's thought to be the biggest untapped oil supply in North America. And why is that important? Because Prudhoe Bay, remember we built the big North Slope pipeline down from Prudhoe Bay. It's operating at about 70% of capacity now. And anytime you start an oil field in production, once it starts into production, it starts declining. You need to keep drilling to keep that oil flowing. It's down to about 70% of capacity. At some point in the future, that pipeline is going to get to a flow rate where it's uneconomic for the pipeline. It just doesn't make sense, and it will have to be decommissioned and taken up and recovered and reclaimed. And that'll strand all the remaining oil up there. Well, this ANWR that they just leased, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, was going to flow into that pipeline, and that would have extended the pipeline life for many decades. But again, now that's completely gone. It's doubtful it will be produced. And that's another big thing. I haven't really heard anybody talking about that at this point. But these are all bad things. And the overall goal is to increase energy prices from fossil fuels and increase them and increase them and increase them. They want your listeners to be paying $8 per gallon for gasoline. And what that does, it makes that electric car look a little bit more attractive to you. And it makes that electricity generated from wind and solar, all of a sudden it becomes competitive with that compared to coal, or in particular natural gas-fired electricity is wildly economic. And again, that provides abundant, reliable, affordable energy. But again, their goal is just to increase cost for everybody.
So I guess I'm missing so fossil fuels, in their opinion, are so deadly, and they're so damaging to the environment that we should basically raise prices, double, quadruple, quintuple prices, and that's all going to somehow make it better.
Yeah, and they're basing it on this demonization of the CO2 molecule, carbon dioxide. And of course, I'm executive director of the Co2 Coalition, and we look at what's actually happening, and we see that the modest warming combined with increasing CO2 is leading to an Earth that's thriving and prospering. And humanity's benefiting from that modest rise in temperature combined with increasing CO2. And by almost every metric, Earth's ecosystems are improving. So it's just opposite of what we're being told, isn't it? And we're being told, oh my God, we can't let it get another 1.5 or 2 degrees warmer. Well, as a geologist, I look back through time, and in my second book I'm writing, the first book that I wrote was Inconvenient Facts. It's still a very popular book right now. But the second book I'm exploring the strong relationship between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of civilizations. And it's a fascinating. And it's just opposite of what we're being told. During each of the past warming periods, civilizations thrived. Food was bountiful. Great empires arose. And it was, again, just opposite. We're being told, oh, my God, if it gets any warmer, we're going to have famine, death. What? That's just opposite of what we find from history. Through history, again, these warming periods were hugely beneficial. And it was the cold. When it started getting cold, bad things happened in the past. Famine, mass depopulation events. And we saw, in almost every one of those periods, we saw civilization and population almost halve of population in the earth. And and again, just the opposite of what we're being told. So my big message, the takeaway for you and your listeners should be welcome the warmth and fear the cold.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm in Florida here, and our winter so far has been quite chilly. We've had many days. I wake up for the past 2-3 weeks, 50 to 53 degrees first thing in the morning. And that is a low temperature here for our winter. So why is that happening if the Earth is heating up?
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Today's show is brought to you by GR Silver Mining, ticker symbol TSX, GRSL, OTC, GRSLF, and their website at grsilvermining.com. The company is extremely well capitalized, currently has a resource of 40 million ounces of silver, and is looking to triple that number in just the next year alone. Its management team is first rate, headed up by Marcio Fonseca, a geologist with vast experience in mining operations and the financial sector as well. With all this going for it, and with silver trading over $25 the ounce, there's no telling how high GR Silver Mining will go. So go to grsilvermining.com to stay up to date on the latest developments and get on their notification list today.
This is the Financial Survival Network, the information you need to thrive now more than ever.
Well, that's more of a weather-related event. We have to look at the big picture, look at many decades, and actually, if we need to, as a geologist, we need to put this in the big picture of many thousands or millions of years to see what's going on. Because if you just look at the last 50 or 100 or even 150 years, you could convince yourself there's some relationship between CO2 and temperature. But putting it into the long-term perspective, we've seen that the other temperature rises similar to what we have right now occurred at very low carbon dioxide levels. And again, we're in a warming trend. Again, we are. There's no doubt about that. But it started about 300 years ago, long before we started adding CO2 to the atmosphere. Okay. So this has been going on for more than 300 years.
All right. So what about rising sea levels? When I look at a picture of Miami Beach from the 1920s and 30s, and I look at modern day Miami Beach, the beach line is identical. Yep. In fact, in some places, it's actually wider because they've dredged sand and widened the beach. And then they've done all this planting of foliage, which makes total sense. Planting trees, we know. So we're not like dealing with rising sea levels. We're dealing with erosion. Is there a difference?
Well, sea level is rising, but it's at a very slow rate. And it's at about the same rate as we had it back in 1850. And bear in mind, we only started adding CO2 enough that could possibly have any warming effect would have been in the mid-20th century. So the rate of sea level rise has not increased. And that's okay. Again, anytime that we get a warming period, we've seen each one of these other warming periods, we saw that sea level rose. That's what happens when we melt land-based glaciers. That water ends up in the ocean. What you may not know, and your listeners may not know, you could melt the entire northern polar ice cap and it would have virtually no effect on sea level. And that's because that northern polar ice cap in the Arctic Ocean is just ice floating on water. So you can do that experiment at home, throw some ice cubes. Well, yeah, but if you put it, remember the icebergs displace about 90% or so. 90% of that iceberg is below. And if you just do that experiment at home, put a couple of ice cubes in a glass of water, and when it melts, that water level will be the same before the ice melted and after the ice melted. So it's because of that displacement we know the water expands when it freezes. So the sea level rise has continued at about the same rate. And, glaciers are retreating for the most part around the Earth. Not in all places. And sometimes they advance, sometimes they retreat. Or since we are in a warming period, they're retreating right now. And again, that's an entirely natural process that we've seen repeated time and time and time again. We're being told that it's unusual and unprecedented. Well, it is if you only look at 300 years or 200 years or 100 years. But again, Earth's processes need to be looked at in a much longer time span.
No doubt, you're correct. Well, I look at it, to me, go out to Long Island, to Montauk. There's a lighthouse that was built 200 some odd years ago. And the fact is that it's a couple hundred feet. It's receded. But it's not that the ocean has risen. It's the fact that what happened is the beach eroded. And so there's a difference between the two. And a lot of people out there seem to mistake beach erosion for actual sea rise.
Yeah, and you have to be careful too. There's this, it depends. In some places, the Earth's surface is either falling or rising. And actually, much of the northeastern coast, its tectonic activity, it's a rebound effect from the melting of the last large advance of the glaciers. And so it's actually rebounding. It's called isostatic rebound. Right. And that's what's leading to this rise.
So it's got nothing to do with the seas rising because of climate change and CO2 and all that. Yeah, this White House was built in 1796, and it was like hundreds of feet from the ocean. And now it's very close. It's on a cliff. And you just see that the ocean hasn't risen. It's just erosion. Beach erosion is normal. And we see it all over. And a lot of barrier islands that are with us today aren't going to be there in the future, having nothing to do with climate change, right?
Well, yeah, barrier islands, and I've studied, as a geologist, I studied barrier islands, and they're fascinating, but they're also mobile. They tend to, in one part of the island might be eroding, and at the other end of the island, it might be deposition. So they tend to move, and there also tends to be tidal channels that cut across there. So barrier islands in particular are rarely in one place at one time and for a set period of time, but actually moving constantly, very slowly, mind you. It might be, you might not recognize it for a period of 50 or 100 or more years, but that's just the fact of the matter for this.
Yeah. And they're in flux. They appear to be stable, staying the same, but not necessarily. And they're one good hurricane away from having a channel cut in them. It's happened in Long Island numerous times. It's happened all over the place. So we can't really judge the effect of climate on barrier islands, I guess is what I'm saying, correct?
Oh, absolutely not. No. You have to first look. When we study sea level rise, we measure this on a thing called a tide gauge. That's the long-term tide gauges. And we have a lot of these tide gauges that go back several hundred years. They've been measured. And so we have a pretty good idea that sea level started rising in the early 1800s. And again, remember I said that we've been warming for over 300 years. And actually, the warming, we know when it started was around 1695, the late 17th century, is when we came out of the death-dealing cold of what was called the Little Ice Age, horrifically cold period. And we've been warming in fits and starts ever since. But it was only in the early 1800s that the warming led to, now bear in mind, with glaciers receding and sea level rising, those things go hand in hand. As glaciers melt, it adds to the sea level. But in the early 1800s, it finally warmed up enough that winter ice accumulation, or rather summer ice melt, exceeded winter ice accumulation, if you follow me. And at that point, the glaciers started retreating. And by about 1850, they started retreating at about the same rate they are today. We haven't seen it. And if global warming generated by CO2-driven warming was actually occurring, we should see an acceleration of both sea level rise and from glacial retreat. And we do not. Sea level is rising, yes. Glaciers are retreating, yes. But again, at the same levels that they have for, it's been going on 150 years now.
So this is all much ado about nothing.
Yes, and not only that, if we look at what it is. Now, I will tell you that CO2 is increasing, and that increase in CO2 is mainly due to our burning of fossil fuels. Okay, I agree with that. And I also agree that increasing CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and it adds some warming effect to the atmosphere. I agree with that. That's science. We know that. I just think that warming effect that CO2 has is very modest and overwhelmed by the same natural forces that have been driving temperatures, well, really since the dawn of time. You have to look back. If CO2 was driving temperatures, we see that that has not happened throughout Earth's history. But we're being told, all that changed in the middle of the 20th century when we started adding huge amounts of CO2. Well, yeah, we've added some CO2. We're at a little over 400 parts per million right now, 420 parts per million today. But throughout Earth's history, again, as a geologist, I look long term, throughout Earth's history, CO2 levels average 2,600 parts per million.
So not a big deal then, huh?
Right. 6 times average of CO2 throughout Earth's history, 6 times what they are today. So rather than saying we have too much CO2, we should look at it like that and say we're actually CO2 impoverished.
Yeah, maybe we didn't have enough, huh?
Exactly. Again, it's the combination. Oh, yes, I'm down with that. If you look on the back of my SUV, I've got a bumper sticker that says "I heart CO2." I was just wearing my T-shirt, working away on my next book yesterday, wearing my "I heart CO2" T-shirt.
Oh, that's funny. Well, there's people out there that don't have your sense of humor, unfortunately, Gregory. Hey, we want to find out more about you, connect with you on the web. Where's the best place to find you these days?
Well, you could go to the Co2 Coalition, co2coalition.org, or you could find out more of my writings at inconvenientfacts.xyz. Inconvenient Facts is available at Amazon. Go get it. It's you will not be disappointed. I wrote it for non-scientists. We've got a huge number of 5-star reviews, approaching 1,300, which is a huge number.
That's huge, yeah. That's great. Well, hey, we appreciate it. And the link will be in the show notes to this interview on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Sign up for your free newsletter. Make sure you check out the Twitter feed at Kerry Lutz. Greg, it's been a great pleasure to have you on the show. Really enlightening. And we wish you the best.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now. more than ever.